Welcome to Contemporary Black Voices, where we take on the issues important to Black America. I am the writer Fred, and with me today are the other members of this outstanding team. New York Times bestselling author and our encyclopedia of information, Caleb Alexander. Professor and author, Dr. Sharon Michael Chadwell, and outstanding businessman and community leader, Chris Dawkins. Today, we will analyze just how effective has General Order Number 3, written by General Gordon Granger on June 19, 1865, now known as Juneteenth, been in achieving its goals. On that day in Galveston, Texas, Granger read the order which began most significantly with, and this is important, the people of Texas are informed that in accordance with a proclamation from the executive that went into effect on January 1, 1863, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of rights and rights of property between former oppressor and the proclamation that reads masters, but I refuse to use that term, and the oppressed. In the proclamation, it also reads slaves, but I also refuse to use that term. And the connection heretofore existing between them become between employer and hired labor. To begin our discussion, I want to turn to my good brother Caleb Alexander, who in our recent publication of Black Life Texas wrote a scathing attack of the order, demonstrating that it has been a failure to achieve the goals articulated in the general order. And remember, folks, remember the general order, it said equal, equal, equal. And I know that's what Caleb's getting ready to jump. Brother Caleb, go for it.
So that sounds like a sit-up. No, no, but you know, my take on Juneteenth was this, though. In the article, I talked about, I could imagine Granger pulling up and saying that you people are free now. And then I can imagine those people saying, free to go where and do what? You know what I mean? Right. With what? And so that was the fundamental argument that I had with that. You know what I mean? And so you had the proclamation to award the freed peoples the 40 acres and a mule, and that proposition that was rescinded. And so here you have a situation where you're telling people.
Hold on. Talk about the prior views. They may not know a lot about that. And that's important. The whole thing about the 40 acres.
Okay. Yeah. So right. And so I forgot. It was Sherman. It was a General Order 10 by Sherman. And so he issued General Order Number 10, which granted 40 acres and a mule to each newly freed person. And so it was primarily in the southeastern part of the country. And so what ended up happening is that order was later rescinded by the next president,
Andrew
Johnson after Lincoln. And so Johnson rescinded the order, and the former Confederate soldiers returned home, and they were given their property back. And so the whole thing about being free, my thing was this, is that how can you be free without being economically free? And so that was the kind of the gist of that article and that argument. And so it's the case for being free without the economics to follow it. And in addition to that, the order would stay in place, stay where you are, and it was you said former slaves to become employees, and they kind of rejig that social contract.
Yeah.
And so how free were you when you really weren't? Your travel was still restricted. You entered into a new compact where you became basically sharecropping. But I mean, sharecropping is a generous term for it, because they really weren't free to travel at all. They really weren't free. They had nothing. The South's economy was ruined. Remember, the majority of the wealth was tied into them as a person. That was the South's wealth. And so the South had lost the wealth. Everyone was hurting at that time. And so it was a situation where you had nothing. And so where do you go when you have nothing? Your movements are restricted, and you enter into a new compact, and it's a compact where they don't even value your life because you're not property anymore. And so those were kind of the subject that I covered in that article.
That's key, what you just said. Mm-hmm. They no longer valued your life because you're no longer property. And that's where you see there been escalation of murders and killing of black people throughout the South. Let me ask, anybody can chime in here. Do you think if Lincoln had lived, that 40 acres and a mule would have been carried through? Or do you think the situation would have been different? Because we know Andrew Johnson was from Tennessee, and the only reason he became vice president is because he stayed with the Union, and Lincoln knew eventually the war would be over, and he wanted to have that balance.
Right.
He wanted to have that balance, the South, and then we have all the black codes that come along. You were addressing some of them. So I guess my question is, do you all think that if Lincoln had lived, it would have been different? Anyway,
We'd all be in Liberia.
talk about that for a second.
Go ahead. No, go
I was going to say that if Lincoln had lived, he might have said 40 acres and a mule, but Andrew Johnson had already decided if he became president, he was going to rescind that order. So it would have been a temporary situation.
But if Lincoln had lived, Johnson probably, I would imagine, never become president.
I agree.
Because that was, in fact, the Republicans that controlled didn't want. In fact, they ended up impeaching, but not convicting Andrew Johnson.
Correct.
So, yeah, but what you're getting ready to make earlier, Caleb,
What's that?
was about.
We'd all be in Liberia.
Yeah, talk about, because that's important, because people don't know Lincoln would have cut that deal, wouldn't he?
Yeah. I mean, and they had already started the process. You know what I mean? It was already, at that time, it had already been a long established process of transporting African Americans back to Liberia and establishing the American colony of Liberia. And so Lincoln had questions about what was to become of black people after the war. He had big questions about it. There was a big debate surrounding the future of black folks in this country. And so Lincoln was the way he's portrayed today in history is not the Lincoln of that time. And so Lincoln, we remember his statement: if he could hold the Union together without freeing a single slave, he would.
Yeah.
And so Lincoln was not really.
So he was on code.
Yeah, he wasn't the Lincoln that they portrayed him to be today. Yeah. So we would probably all have been put on ships. There's a good chance that we would have all been put on ships and transported back to the American colony in Liberia.
Yeah, because he had that meeting, I think Frederick Douglass, maybe Sojourner Truth was at that meeting, and he told them, look, this country is not for you all. He straight out told them that he was against the expansion of slavery into the new territories. And the South, if he could have cut that deal with the South, keep slavery where it is, don't fight for the expansion. But those plantation owners were looking at all that land beyond, because you know, at that point now Texas had become a slave state, and they're looking at New Mexico all the way to California, and they wouldn't agree to it. So I think that's a very important point, that Lincoln would have wanted all black folks to
Get on the boat.
get on the boat.
May I ask a question of the rest of the panel? My question would be is, what does Juneteenth mean to blacks in America today? And how can we use it to promote a possible liberation? And before you answer that question, let me give 2 points that I want to give. First of all, my perspective is from a person who's coming from the North. When I came to Texas, I didn't know anything about Juneteenth at all. Juneteenth seemed to be kind of like a Southern type of deal, and I began to learn about it, not only coming here, because it was starting to creep up into Ohio maybe about 1997, 1998. It was beginning to creep into there. So my perspective of Juneteenth is a little bit different coming from the North. The second thing is that I'm hoping that the future for this holiday does not become a commercial endeavor for everybody else except for African Americans. So I come back to my original question to ask, what does Juneteenth mean to African Americans going forward?
The way I'm looking at it is, we had a discussion earlier that Mario Bauer, Senior, from at HBCU, I think Lincoln University, academic, he's a director. And one of the things that he did was apply for a trademark on Juneteenth, the name Juneteenth. And last year, many of us saw, going to Walmart, going to HEB, all these products with Juneteenth on it, with the trademark symbol. Well, he had already gone through the process of trademarking. And the reason why he did that was to say, we've got to protect the culture as much as we can, because he knew that corporations were going to start trying to go for the trademark. And sure enough, a lot of folks did. So even if you go to some of the Chinese-oriented websites where you can get like cheap products, like kind of like a dollar store, you're seeing Juneteenth products already there. People see it as a moneymaker. They see us, society, corporation sees the African American or the Black community as its cash cow. As its cash cow. So I think we have to be prepared for that. But at the same token, we need to look at the holiday as an opportunity to share the culture with each other.
Well, look, we got about 2 more minutes before we go to a break. So were there some other questions?
I think your question we should answer. What is it, the future based on this idea of Juneteenth mean for Black people?
And so, I mean, just a little bit, I think that we need to look at Juneteenth. So don't email me. Celebrate. don't. I don't want to hit you. You can argue about the potato salad and all that kind. Just celebrate, barbecue, whatever. But I think that we need to revisit the idea of Juneteenth and just really re-examine. I mean, I kind of view Juneteenth as as celebrating the field goal without actually scoring a touchdown. And so we need to examine the failed promise of Juneteenth, because again, freedom without economics is hollow. And so even you have Dr. King, whose message changed from one of social justice to economic justice. And so he got killed, and then they killed him. And so we really need to take a look at Juneteenth from the perspective that it's not complete. And so every other group in this country has been compensated for their injustices. And so you have to take Juneteenth and understand what it was and why we're celebrating it. We're celebrating freedom, but it's a hollow celebration without being compensated for the historic wrongdoings. And so that's the conversation that we need to be having on Juneteenth, is about the next steps. Okay. And so, yeah.
Okay. So we're going to take a break here, but when we come back, we're going to continue this very important topic, Juneteenth, and what it means to Black America. We'll be right back with you at Contemporary Black Voices.